It is 3 o'clock in the morning, summer 1816, Switzerland. A young woman is lying awake in a rented house by a lake. Her mind is filled with an image she cannot escape, a man kneeling over a body he has built from stolen parts, dead flesh, dead bones. And then, a spark. The thing opens its eyes. She is 18 years old. She has never published anything. The famous poets around her have been trying for days to write a ghost story. None of them have managed it. She has. Her name was Mary Shelley, and the story she imagined that night would become one of the most famous books ever written. But almost nobody knows her story, and it is just as extraordinary as the monster she created. Mary was born in London in 1797, and from the very first day of her life she was surrounded by death. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, was one of the most important feminist writers in history. She had argued that women deserved the same education as men. In 1797, that was a radical idea, meaning it was shocking, ahead of its time. But she died just 11 days after giving birth. Our Mary never knew her mother. Her father, William Godwin, was a famous philosopher. Their house was a meeting place for brilliant minds, scientists, poets, writers. Mary once listened to the poet Coleridge recite one of his greatest poems in her living room. She was a child at the time, but she felt neglected. Her father remarried, and Mary did not get along with her stepmother. She spent hours reading in her mother's old study, and she would visit her mother's grave regularly, sitting there among the headstones, reading, writing. A graveyard became her quiet place, remember that. A girl who found comfort among the dead. When Mary was 16, a young poet named Mary Shelley began visiting her father's house. He was 21, brilliant, passionate, and married. None of that stopped them. In July 1814, they ran away together, eloped, meaning they left secretly, without permission. Mary was 16, her father refused to speak to her. The next 2 years were brutal, no money, constant moving, and in February 1815, Mary gave birth to a baby girl. The baby was premature, born too early. She died 12 days later. Mary was 17. She wrote in her journal, "Find my baby dead." She dreamed for weeks that the baby came back to life, that she held her by the fire and warmed her until she breathed again. A mother dreaming of bringing the dead back to life. Keep that image. In May 1816, Mary, Percy, and her stepsister Claire travelled to Switzerland to visit the most famous poet in England, Lord Byron. Byron was 28, brilliant, arrogant, scandalous. He had rented a grand villa, called the Villa Diodati, overlooking Lake Geneva. Percy and Byron had never met, but they admired each other's work, and so two poets, a teenage writer, a stepsister, and Byron's young doctor, John Polidori, gathered by the lake for what was supposed to be a pleasant summer. It was anything but pleasant. The previous year, a volcano called Mount Tambora had erupted in Indonesia, one of the most powerful eruptions in recorded history. The ash clouds spread across the planet. Temperatures dropped. Crops failed. In Europe, the summer of 1816 was so cold and so dark that people called it the year without a summer. At Lake Geneva, the weather was terrible. Endless rain, violent storms, lightning cracking across the mountains every night. The group was trapped inside for days. They read by candlelight. They argued about science. And one question kept returning. Could a dead body be brought back to life? Scientists at the time were experimenting with electricity, applying currents to dead animals, watching muscles twitch and jerk. It was called galvanism, and it raised a terrifying question. If you could make a dead frog's leg move with electricity, could you do the same to a human being? One evening, Byron said, "Let us each write a ghost story." Byron started one and abandoned it. Percy tried and gave up. Polidori wrote a short story about a vampire, which became the first vampire story in English literature. But the person who took it most seriously was the youngest and quietest in the room. For days, Mary had nothing. The men asked her every morning, "Have you thought of a story?" Every morning, she had no answer. Then, around 3 in the morning on June 16th, Mary had what she called a waking dream. She saw a pale student kneeling beside a thing he had assembled. A hideous figure, and then it moved. It opened its eyes. She was terrified. She wanted to escape the image, and then she realised that was her story. Mary began writing the next day. Percy encouraged her to expand what started as a short story into a full novel. And here is what makes this extraordinary. She did not write a simple horror story. She wrote something far more complex and far more modern. The story of Frankenstein is about a young scientist named Victor Frankenstein who discovers how to create life. He builds a creature from dead body parts and brings it to life. But the moment the creature opens its eyes, Victor is horrified. He abandons it, runs away, refuses any responsibility. The creature is not evil. It is intelligent, sensitive, capable of deep feeling. But it is so hideous that every person who sees it reacts with fear and violence. It tries to learn, to connect, to be accepted. It is rejected every single time. Eventually, the creature becomes violent, not because it was born that way, but because the world made it that way. It was abandoned by its creator. It was never loved. Think about what Mary was really writing. She had lost her mother at birth. She had been rejected by her father. She had lost a baby and dreamed of bringing it back to life. And now she was writing about a creator who gives life to something and abandons it. About a being that only wants to be loved and is destroyed by rejection. But the book went even further. It asked questions nobody had asked before in fiction. If we can create something, does that mean we should? What do we owe the things we bring into the world? Where is the line between progress and destruction? These are the questions we still ask today, about artificial intelligence, about genetic engineering, about technology that moves faster than our ability to control it. Mary Shelley asked them first, at 18. In January 1818, the book was published, 500 copies, cheapest paper, small London publisher, and here is the detail that tells you everything about the world she lived in. Her name was nowhere on it. The book was published anonymously. Percy had written a short preface. Most readers, most critics, assumed a man had written it. After all, how could a teenage girl have written something so powerful? This doubt persisted for over a century, but her original notebooks, still preserved in Oxford, tell the truth. Percy made minor corrections. The story, the ideas, the structure, all Mary's, and the book, as one friend wrote at the time, seemed to be universally read. It has never stopped. The years after Frankenstein were brutal. Mary and Percy moved to Italy. Their daughter Clara died in 1818. Their son William died in 1819. Then, in 1822, Percy went sailing in a small boat off the Italian coast. A storm came. The boat sank. He was 29. Mary was 24. She had lost her mother, her half-sister, 3 of her 4 children, and now her husband. She returned to England alone with her surviving son. She spent the next 30 years writing novels, stories, travel books, and editing Percy's poetry so the world would remember him. She fought for independence in a time when that was nearly impossible for a woman with her reputation. She never matched the fame of Frankenstein, but she did not need to. At 18, she had written a book that would outlive every person in that villa by Lake Geneva. Byron died in 1824. Percy was already gone. Polidori had died in 1821. Mary lived until 1851. She was 53. Everyone knows Frankenstein, the name, the monster, the idea of creating life. It is part of our culture, hundreds of films, books, and plays. But for 200 years, the woman who created it was overlooked, doubted. Her work attributed to her husband, her genius questioned because of her age and her gender. She was 18. She had already buried a child. She was surrounded by men who were older, more famous, and more respected. And she wrote the story that outlasted all of them. The next time you hear the name Frankenstein, remember it was not created by a mad scientist. It was created by a teenage girl during a storm, a girl who knew what it meant to lose, to be abandoned, and to bring something into the world that the world was not ready for. Her name was Mary Shelley, and this has been her story. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to Storied English. Every video tells a real story in clear, natural English, designed to help you learn while you listen. Leave a comment. What surprised you most about Mary Shelley? I will see you in the next one.